As much criticism as 90s comics receive, and despite what is often said, that decade gave us some of the most iconic stories, characters, and unforgettable moments in comic book history. Yes, the era had several missteps and excesses, but if there's one area where the 90s truly excelled, it was in the abundance of female characters. Nowhere was this more evident than in the wide variety of good girls and bad girls that entered the comic book scene. There was a especially big boom of blonde bombshells during that time, as if there was some sort of blonde invasion. Yet, amongst this golden wave, was one character that stood out from the rest, however briefly. Barb Wire, the toughest blonde from the 90s. A breakout star who shot her way to the spotlight, only to have her rise to fame cut short by the misfires of Hollywood decision makers, which marked the character forever. While DC and Marvel have long been the titans of American comics, one publisher managed to stand tall besides them in terms of sales, prestige, and impact. Dark Horse Comics, best known as the home of legendary titles like Hellboy, The Mask, Usagi Yojimbo, and Ghost. Dark Horse was no stranger to high-profile work, and amongst their titles stood Barb Wire, a different kind of character who captured readers' attention, not with superpowers or flashy costumes, but with grit, attitude, and unique style. Created by Chris Warner, and with a catchphrase that later became iconic, Barb Wire, whose real name is Barbara Kopetsky, is the bounty hunter, bar owner, and former war veteran from the rough dystopian city of Steel Harbor. Barb is the city's most famous resident, with her name alone striking fear in the minds of the city's lowlifes and criminals. Now, make no mistake, while she may visibly resemble a fitness model or a lightweight bodybuilder, Barb is every bit as tough and deadly as her male counterparts, if not more so. One of the things that made Barb Wire stand out was how she switched the familiar angry hot girl trope around, as she didn't have a cartoonish attitude or was overtly seductive. Instead, she was cool and contained, but with a certain edge. Yes, she wore revealing outfits at times, but nothing as remotely revealing as the other femmes at the time. Not to mention her attitude and moral code made it clear she wasn't interested in exploiting her looks. Unlike the other good and bad girls of that time, Barb Wire didn't use her body to get ahead. She used her fists instead. Her stories were mostly grounded and perhaps a little low-key, especially when compared to the other titles published by Dark Horse Comics. Even though she did interact with superpowered beings every now and then, the comic always addressed them in a realistic manner. But above all things, what made Barb Wire stand out was the fact that her comics were just plain fun, which is why they were so well received by the public. Her popularity led to crossovers with several of Dark Horse's biggest names, including The Mask, Wolfgang, and most notably, Ghost, with whom Barb developed an interesting dynamic, with an alliance that worked like a deep friendship, and possibly even something more intimate, though that layer of their relationship was never fully explored. As someone famous once said, true triumph is marked not by applause, but by those who follow to its footsteps, and imitators are the unofficial fan club of success. Barb Wire's swift success obviously drew in copycat characters. One of the most obvious ones was Shotgun Mary, a spin-off character from Ben Dunn's Warrior Non Ariola series. Everything about Shotgun Mary's look and personality seemed to be modeled after Barb. While Shotgun Mary had her own following, and had considerable differences from Barb. She often came across as a more bland and flavorless version of the two. By the way, and no disrespect to her fans, but to be fair, she lacked the character elements that made Barb Wire so special. By the mid-90s, the success of Barb Wire and other Dark Horse titles had attracted Hollywood's attention. Eager to cash in on the comic book boom, Dark Horse struck a deal with Universal Pictures to adapt properties to the big screen. While the first of these adaptations was Dr. Giggles, featuring Holly Marie Combs, who would go on to star in the popular show Charmed, it wouldn't be until The Mask from 1994, starring Jim Carrey and Cameron Diaz, that things truly took off. The film became a massive box office hit, proving that Dark Horse properties had serious cinematic potential. And so, on the heels of The Mask's success, Universal Pictures greenlit several more projects. Amongst them was Barb Wire, which ironically only had a few issues out. Instead of choosing the obvious and arguably perfect choice, Peta Wilson, who was born to play Barb Wire, as she is both a soldier and a professional model, not to mention a legitimate actress. The Barb Wire producers instead went for the Playboy playmate Pamela Anderson, who is best known for being beautiful, as well as having a whopping chest, and perhaps also for being the world's best belly inhaler. Pam Anderson was undeniably a high-profile celebrity at the time, and her casting brought the project an enormous amount of attention, to the point where Barb Wire became the most publicized film of the year. However, that fame came at a cost, as Pam was frequently entangled in scandals and tabloid controversies, which heavily influenced the public's perception of the film. Her bad reputation preceded her, and rather than elevating the project, it overshadowed it, ultimately damaging Barb Wire's credibility before it even had a chance. Sadly, the casting choice wasn't the only aspect of the film that was lacking. For some reason, the plot of the film was nearly identical to the one from the all-time classic Casablanca. Aside from a few character names and locations, the film bared little to no resemblance to the actual comic. The film presented Barb Wire as an alluring seductress who just loved to show off her body at any whim, which once again is quite far from what the comic is actually about. The film featured multiple scenes of gratuitous nudity since the very beginning of the film, starting with the movie's opening, which features a long sequence of Pamela Anderson dancing at a strip club, where she is soaked with water hoses while exposing her assets to a crowd of creepy men. We also see her take bubble baths in see-through tanks, as well as changing her clothes in front of men and posing as both a stripper as well as a dominatrix streetwalker, which once again has nothing to do with the actual character. Now, one of the film's strangest choices, aside from the underwhelming script and the strange choice to cast Pamela Anderson over the far more fitting Peta Wilson, was the baffling decision to completely abandon Barb Wire's distinctive comic look in favor of something more generic and out of character. In the original comics, Barb's style was iconic, unique, and instantly recognizable. Few characters have been able to pull off the color pink with as much impact as she did. The best part is, pink wasn't just an aesthetic choice. It was a deliberate decision to throw you off, as pink has always been associated with softness and femininity. But for Barb, it became her camouflage, used ironically to contrast her tough, no-nonsense attitude and deadly skills. Instead, the film went for a black leather corset, a matching jacket, and fishnet tights, a look associated with another legendary comic book character, Black Canary. What makes this choice even stranger is the fact that Pamela Anderson is famously fond of wearing pink. So, adapting that into the film's design would have been not only true to the character, but completely in line with Anderson's established persona. It was a missed opportunity that cost the film its visual identity. To make matters worse, despite the terrible reviews and the failure at the box office, the Barb Wire film damaged the comic in more than one way, as Barb would later be shaped to look more like the film version, and so every later appearance made by Barb looked exactly like Pamela Anderson, something that proved to be for the worse, as the character not only lost her relevance, but over time turned into something people no longer wanted to associate with, starting with a failed miniseries that came out to coincide with the film, as well as the other appearances she made before going back to obscurity. All these needless changes made to the character to better fit the leading actress proved to be the final straw. In her case, the negative impact made by the film was so profound that the source material was never able to recover, as this poorly executed adaptation overshadowed the original character, redefining the public's perception on the character and making it difficult for the character to make a comeback. What was once a well-liked and respected character from a hit comic became remembered not for being the simple but fun character that was so easy to love, but for its failed cinematic counterpart, ultimately killing any chances Barb Wire had in the future. Now, for better or worse, and much to everyone's surprise, long after the film's release and initial ridicule, the Hollywood version of Barb Wire has slowly but surely crept back into the spotlight. This unexpected resurgence is largely due to a wave of models, influencers, and high-profile celebrities who have recently begun dressing up as a character for some reason, from the foul-mouthed rapper Cardi B and younger Kardashian sister Kendall Jenner to the always controversial YouTuber Trisha Paytas, and even other famous peoples whose names I honestly don't know. And perhaps most shockingly, the world-famous icon Beyoncé, who not only dressed as Barb Wire, but who used the look to promote her latest album. For some strange reason, this look has strangely become somewhat iconic, though it's quite clear that these celebrities have absolutely no idea who the character really is or what she's actually about. And honestly, even if they did, which I doubt, I don't think they would care. Somehow, and quite bizarrely, Pamela Anderson's look has evolved into a go-to costume for any woman who wants attention by dressing up as a sexy, edgy character. It's ironic that a character once considered a failure has now become a pop culture costume staple. In perhaps the most ironic twist of fate that nobody saw coming, Pamela Anderson made a 180 on her career and image, drastically changing the ditzy blonde look and demeanor for a more glamorous and serious one, to the point where she has become a highly respected symbol of natural beauty, as well as an acclaimed actress with Oscar buzz. And even though I think it's great that everything worked out for Pam, I just can't help but feel a little bitter at the fact that Barb was never able to do the same. Pam was able to remove herself from Barbed Wire, but Barbed Wire was never able to remove herself from Pamela. And that's just not fair. In 2015, Barbed Wire creator Chris Warner tried rebooting the character in an all-new miniseries, but with little success. On a personal note, I gave this run a chance at the time, but was never really able to connect with the character the same way I did and still do with the OG Barb. With all due respect to Chris Warner, both the story and the art were never really as good as the original. and everything felt underwhelming, to say the least. All the magic captured by the original Barb Wire was absent, and all that was left was an empty shallow of what was once great. Now, dear viewer, please tell me, were you a fan of the OG Barb Wire? Or do you associate her with Pam Anderson? And if so, did you watch the film? As always, thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Be safe and well. And remember, don't call her babe.